The hall was lit up, the sound of music filled every corner of the party, laughter and conversations mixed together, creating an atmosphere of celebration. Glasses clinked, toasts were made, co-workers extolled the year's achievements, and everything seemed to follow a natural flow, but for me, that moment carried an unbearable weight. My eyes were fixed on the scene in front of me, my wife spinning in the middle of the room, wrapped in my boss's arms. His hands held her waist with confidence, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that already said a lot, and the smile on his face revealed that this wasn't just a dance. It was invaded territory. It was disrespect being displayed in front of everyone. I could have swallowed my indignation, ignored that exaggerated closeness, convinced myself that it was just a moment of relaxation. But I knew. I always knew. Small details, subtle gestures, averted glances, excuses that didn't line up. And now, there, before my eyes, their mask fell, and I was no longer willing to be the naive man who accepted crumbs of respect. The waiter passed by me, offering another shot of whiskey, but I refused. My blood was already burning enough. I walked to the middle of the room, feeling the eyes follow me. The instant my voice cut through the music, the entire party froze. "Congratulations to you both," he said, and a sepulchral silence took over the room. My wife's eyes widened in surprise, and the boss had the audacity to try to sustain a smile. "But tonight is a special night. I want to share something with you," I continued, and everyone waited, holding their breath. "I want to announce my divorce, here, now. My wife and my dear boss are officially free to be together without having to hide anything." The impact of the words reverberated in the environment. Some murmured, others looked in disbelief, and my wife covered her mouth, as if she only realized at that moment the scale of what she had done. The boss, in turn, remained motionless, his arrogance slowly disappearing. None of them had a quick answer. None of them were prepared to be unmasked in public. She came closer, trying to hold my arm. "Don't do this, not here," he whispered, but there was no more room for retreat. "This is the perfect place," I replied, my voice firm, with no room for emotional appeals. "You had no shame in betraying, so why should I have any shame in exposing it?" The boss tried to intervene, keeping his tone calm, forcing control that he no longer possessed. "I think you're taking it all wrong, man. This isn't what it seems." I laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "Isn't it? So tell me, what is it? Enlighten my ignorance." He was silent. My wife tried to justify it. "It was just a dance." "A dance?" I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "What about all the deleted messages? The schedules that didn't match? The lame excuses?" With each sentence, I saw the color drain from his face. How many dances were there before this one? Her silence was the answer. The tension in the room was palpable. Some guests looked away, embarrassed to witness what was supposed to be a private conversation. Others, however, looked on with interest, as if they were facing an unpredictable spectacle. And that's exactly what it was. But unlike a rehearsed show, here, the masks were falling off in real time. My wife's humiliation was evident. Her eyes filled with tears, not of regret, but of despair at being exposed. The boss, realizing that he was losing control of the situation, tried to walk away, but the room's attention was still focused on him. There was no easy escape for either of them. And it was then that something unexpected happened. From across the room, voices began to rise. Murmurs of confirmation. Small details that had previously been ignored came to light. I saw them leaving the parking lot together a few times, one colleague whispered to another. "They always came back from lunch minutes apart," added a third. The truth, the one that had been buried for so long under fake smiles and rehearsed excuses, now emerged, implacable. The boss, who was previously seen as a man of respect and authority, began to lose his credibility among his own employees. My divorce was no longer just a personal scandal, but an event that shook the structures of that company. The boss, who boasted so much about his power and influence, was now under the judgmental eyes of everyone who previously admired him. The cheating wife no longer found refuge in silence. His voice was shaking when he finally managed to stammer out, "Please, let's talk away from here." But there was nothing more to be said. The truth was already in front of everyone. The party had stopped. The impact of that revelation took on proportions that not even I had anticipated. However, as shame consumed them, a doubt lingered in the air. What would happen next? After all, the betrayal was already open, but the consequences, these were just beginning. Welcome to the channel. Here, the betrayal no is romanticized, no is justified and never will be supported. All the stories you hear are fictional, but they carry an indisputable truth: betrayal destroys lives. Every choice has its consequences, and on this channel, you will see how the price of disloyalty always comes, and in ways that no one expects. Get ready, because the story comes next will shock you. Listen carefully, and never forget, respect and loyalty are not optional. The wedding of Daniel and Clara was always seen as solid. From the day they met, there was something about them that made everyone around them believe they were destined for each other. She was charming, with a natural sweetness that made anyone want to be around her. He was charismatic, a man who exuded confidence and determination. They were the kind of couple who looked like they belonged in a romantic movie, balancing their differences and finding harmony in life's challenges. Years passed and together they built a cozy home. Every corner of that house carried a piece of their story, from the picture frames scattered around the living room to the kitchen table, where they shared their conversations about their daily lives. Time brought stability, but also a predictable routine. Clara still prepared coffee every morning for Daniel, and he, in turn, never left the house without giving her a kiss. The gestures were the same as years ago, but something about them seemed different, albeit subtly. Daniel worked in a large company in the financial sector, a competitive and pressure-filled environment. His constant effort earned him respect and a prominent position within the company. As a senior manager, he found himself surrounded by endless meetings, business trips and a load of responsibilities that, over time, began to take a toll. Clara, on the other hand, worked as a freelance graphic designer, working from home and managing her own schedule. She was always an independent woman, but there were moments when she missed something that even she couldn't explain. The differences in their routine began to become more evident. While Daniel returned home exhausted, just wanting a moment of rest, Clara longed for long conversations, for attention. He was always physically present, but his mind often remained caught up in work problems. She tried to ignore that uncomfortable feeling that, little by little, they were moving away. He remembered the times when nights were filled with spontaneous dinners and aimless walks, and he wondered when those things became rare. The company where Daniel worked was known for its dynamic environment, but also for its culture of valuing interpersonal connections. And no one knew how to use it better than Leonardo, the company's CEO. An imposing, charismatic and persuasive man, who dominated any environment with his presence. He knew how to motivate his team, but he also knew how to use his power in subtle ways to achieve what he wanted. He had the respect of his employees, but also a certain fear, because behind that calculated smile, there was a coldness that was difficult to ignore. Leonardo and Daniel have always maintained a balanced professional relationship. The boss recognized Daniel's value in the company and saw him as a promising employee, but at the same time, he kept a close eye on everyone who stood out too much. It was a game of egos and control, where no one could grow too much without him being in charge. In recent months, Leonardo began to show a special interest in establishing a closer bond with Daniel, something that made him question the real intentions behind this approach. Corporate events were an essential part of the company's culture, and Leonardo made sure everyone participated. He believed that these meetings went beyond simple networking, they were moments of observation, where he saw people for who they really were. The end-of-year party was organized on a grand scale, in a luxurious hall, with live music, sophisticated drinks and an atmosphere that oozed status. For Clara, these occasions were not that frequent, but whenever she accompanied Daniel, she tried to make the best of the moment. That night, Clara chose an elegant dress, in a soft tone that highlighted her natural beauty. Daniel, seeing her ready, smiled, but something in his eyes carried tiredness. Not because he didn't admire her, but because his mind was still partially caught up in the challenges of work. He held your hand firmly, as he had always done, and together they headed to the party. When they arrived, they were greeted by warm greetings, Daniel's co-workers praising his career and toasting the company's success. The room was full of voices and laughter, and Clara tried to feel part of that universe to which she belonged only by association. While Daniel was talking to some executives, Leonardo approached, with his characteristic smile and sharp gaze. He greeted Clara in a courteous manner, but with a discreet interest, that kind of attention that was not invasive but noticeable. "I finally meet the woman behind the great Daniel," Leonardo said, and Clara smiled politely. "He speaks very highly of you," he added, while raising a toast. The conversation was brief, but full of nuances. Daniel, attentive, noticed Leonardo's studied manner when interacting with Clara, but quickly dismissed the thought. Leonardo was like that with everyone. A master at creating connections. The party continued its course, between toasts and motivational speeches, and Clara, at a certain point, realized that Daniel was stuck in yet another business conversation. She felt slightly out of place, but she didn't let herself be shaken. He walked around the room, exchanged a few words with the wives of other employees, observed the dance floor where some couples were taking their first steps of the night. It was then that he felt a firm hand touch his arm. When he turned around, he found Leonardo again, now without the formality as before. He was smiling, holding a glass of whiskey. "I hope you're having fun," he said, his engaging voice rising above the music. Clara nodded, maintaining her composure. "It's a beautiful party," she replied, politely. Leonardo then reached out to her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Would you grant me this dance?" Clara hesitated. His gaze wandered around the room, looking for Daniel, but he was far away, in the middle of a heated conversation. She didn't want to seem rude, but she also didn't want to attract attention. "Just one dance," Leonardo insisted, with a charm that seemed rehearsed. For a moment, Clara felt a strange heat in her chest, a mix of discomfort and curiosity. What happened next was a moment frozen in time. The music filled the atmosphere, looks mixed, and in the center of the room, Clara and Leonardo spun around, as if the universe had stopped to watch them. The firm touch on her waist, the intense gaze that challenged her, everything there seemed charged with a tension that she couldn't explain. Daniel, looking up from his conversation, took in the scene. Clara's body next to Leonardo's, the closeness that went beyond simple cordiality. For an instant, the world around him dissolved. Heat rose to his face, his muscles tensed, and a sharp sensation ran through his chest. He was never an impulsive man, he never liked to act on the spur of the moment. But that night, something inside him snapped. And there, at that party where everyone was celebrating, Daniel made the decision that would change everything. That night remained marked on Daniel like a scar that would not disappear anytime soon. The image of Clara and Leonardo dancing together replayed in his mind like a film on loop, every detail relived with cruel precision. His touch on her waist, the closeness of their bodies, the looks exchanged. He tried to shake off the discomfort, tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating, that it was just a dance, but something inside him knew there was more. It was a feeling, an intuition, a silent warning that refused to be ignored. The following days were filled with strange silence. Clara didn't mention dancing, and Daniel didn't bring up the subject either. But the tension was there, invisible, hovering between them like a shadow. He watched his wife's movements more closely, noticing the small changes. Her cell phone, previously left carelessly on the table, now seemed to always be within her reach. Messages that were previously answered without haste now received immediate attention. Sometimes he noticed a different gleam in her eyes, something he couldn't name, but it made his chest feel uncomfortable. Daniel began to test his own sanity. I spent more time at home, I left work earlier, showed up unexpectedly at unusual times. I watched. But nothing seemed obvious. Clara continued to be the same attentive, loving woman, dedicated to her work and the small details of the home. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping from his eyes. Like a figure that disappears the moment you turn to look. Time followed its course, but Daniel's restlessness only grew. He tried to act natural, but his mind was on alert. The different smell in her car, the perfume that wasn't the same as usual. The justification for an extra meeting, an unexpected commitment, the need to leave early or return later. Small cracks were appearing in the perfect image that he was trying to hold on to with all his might. And then, one night, the first concrete sign appeared. Clara was in the shower and her cell phone was vibrating on the bedside table. Daniel was not a man who messed with his wife's things. I trusted her. Or at least I trusted him until that party. But what was once an unshakable certainty was now a house of cards ready to collapse. He looked at the screen. An unidentified number. The message, short, dry, full of meaning that is impossible to ignore: I miss you. I need to see you. The ground seemed to slip away from beneath his feet. For a moment, he remained motionless, holding the cell phone in his hand, trying to find a plausible reason for that message. But there was no innocent explanation. That was exactly what it looked like. He heard the sound of water stopping and quickly put his cell phone back in its place. I didn't say anything. Not that night. In the following days, Daniel observed Clara like never before. Every step, every apology, every expression on her face. Everything fit together into a puzzle that he didn't want to put together, but that, piece by piece, became impossible to ignore. He needed proof. He needed the truth before his eyes. So, he made a decision. The following Friday, Clara left home claiming she was meeting a friend for dinner. A dinner that, according to Daniel, never happened. He waited a few minutes before leaving right behind her. He drove keeping his distance, following the route without rushing. His stomach dropped when he saw that she wasn't going to any restaurant, but rather to a discreet hotel, far enough away to avoid unwanted glances. He parked across the street, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw when Clara got out of the car, fixed her hair, checked her appearance in the reflection in the window. There was something in her manner, a different energy, a glow that he hadn't seen in a long time. But that glow wasn't for him. It was for someone else. She entered the hotel, and shortly after, another figure appeared. Leonardo. Daniel's boss. The man who praised him in meetings, who showed himself as a mentor, who made a point of cultivating a close relationship. There he was, crossing the hotel entrance without hesitation, as if that path was already known. As if that wasn't the first time. Daniel felt his throat dry. He could go in, confront them right there. But no. I wanted to see how far it would go. I needed something that Clara could never deny. Time passed, he waited. 1 hour. 2. No message from her, no explanation. Only the silence that confirmed everything he already knew. When Clara finally left, she walked lightly, a discreet smile on her lips. The expression of someone who had just experienced something intense. Daniel didn't follow her back. He stayed there, standing in the car, feeling the weight of the truth crush him. That night, Clara returned home, greeted Daniel with a light kiss, as if nothing had happened. As if that marriage was still the same. He watched her, studied every movement, every word spoken naturally. What she didn't know was that, inside him, something had already changed. And the next day, he made his decision. The hall was packed, music echoed among the guests, but for Daniel, the world had just become absolute silence. His gaze was fixed on Clara and Leonardo, dancing in the middle of the room as if they were the only ones there. Her body flowed easily under his command, the smiles exchanged, the touches subtle. Daniel clenched his fists but didn't move immediately. Not at that moment. Not in front of so many witnesses. There was something inside him that no longer burned just as anger, but as something much deeper, a feeling of betrayal that gnawed at every fiber of his being. The dance ended, and Clara returned to his side as if nothing had happened. She smiled slightly, but Daniel noticed that there was something in her eyes that betrayed a secret. A glow that wasn't meant for him. The party continued, toasts were made, speeches were given. Leonardo was at the center of everything, as always, the man everyone admired, respected, even feared. But Daniel saw beyond the facade. I saw the dirt behind the flawless mask. As the night drew to a close, Daniel stood up and asked for everyone's attention. The microphone was firmly in his hand, his voice was controlled, but carried with something that made the entire room silent. He started talking about gratitude, about hard work, about the importance of trust in any relationship, whether in the corporate environment or outside of it. And then, without changing his tone, without showing any hesitation, he looked directly at his wife and declared in front of everyone, "Today, I want to take advantage of this special occasion to announce that I am filing for divorce." The impact was immediate. The hall was plunged into a collective murmur of shock and disbelief. The gazes turned to Clara, who froze in place, pale, her eyes wide, her hands shaking slightly. Leonardo remained motionless, but the tension in his jaw showed that he already understood what was coming. Daniel continued. "My wife and my dear boss here did me the favor of freeing me from this marriage. So, it's only fair that I share this news with everyone." Clara finally recovered her voice, but she was no longer as sweet and calm as usual. She was desperate. "Daniel, please don't do this, not here," he laughed, but not out of happiness. "Why not? This is where it all started, isn't it? Or rather, this is where you lost your fear of being discovered." The murmur in the audience grew, some people looked at Leonardo, waiting for him to say something, to deny it, to deny it. But he remained silent, looking at Daniel with something between defiance and helplessness. Clara shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "It wasn't like that, not like that. You're getting it all wrong." "Ah, correct me then. Didn't I see you going into a hotel with him? Didn't I wait outside for hours while you came home with that smile on your face?" She swallowed hard. The lie died before it was even said. Her silence was the final confession. But what no one expected there was what would come next. A voice came from among the guests, cutting through the air like a blade. "Maybe it's a good time for everyone to know the truth about what really goes on in this company." Everyone turned to the source of the voice. Was Fernanda, one of the company's financial coordinators, a woman who had worked there for years, always discreet, always efficient. But now, his expression carried a different weight. Leonardo looked at her directly, and for the first time that night, his look was not one of confidence or arrogance. It was pure fear. Fernanda advanced through the room until she stood in front of everyone. He took a deep breath, his body shook with anger and indignation. "Maybe you think this is just a case of betrayal, but I can assure you it's much more than that." Daniel frowned. "I didn't expect that." "What do you mean?" Fernanda crossed her arms. "I always knew that Leonardo was not a clean man. But what shocked me was finding out how far he was going to get what he wanted." The silence in the hall became deafening. Leonardo took a step forward, trying to take control of the situation. "Fernanda, I don't know what you're talking about, but you need to think carefully before making unfounded accusations." She laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "Unfounded? Maybe you'd better let me talk before you burn yourself even more. Because I have proof. And I'm sure no one here will like what they hear." Daniel's gaze went from his wife to Fernanda, feeling a knot in his stomach. "Say it already." She took a deep breath, held tight to the handle of her bag and took out an envelope full of documents. In here are all the suspicious financial transfers that Leonardo has made over the years. $1 million embezzlements, forged contracts, payments that simply disappear without explanation. And guess where part of that money went? To cover meetings, dinners, hotels, everything he used to maintain an internal scheme of manipulation and coercion. I always suspected, but when I saw the most recent expenses, I knew I needed to act. Daniel took the papers, his eyes scanning the information quickly. And then, there it was. Transactions in absurd amounts, hidden payments. And a name that caught his eye. Clara. Your wife. Her name is linked to transfers, to benefits paid directly by Leonardo. He looked up, staring at her as if he were seeing someone he didn't know. What does that mean? Clara brought her hands to her face, tears now flowing. Daniel, please. I didn't know. I did not know. He took a step forward, his heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to come out of his chest. So you cheated on me for money? You became part of this scheme? She sobbed, her makeup smeared, her face filled with despair. He made me promises, told me that he would never harm you, that it was just an agreement. Daniel threw the papers on the floor. A deal? A damn deal to buy you out while robbing the company? And what did you get out of it, Clara? A new car? An apartment? How much did our story cost? Leonardo tried to intervene, but it was too late. The entire hall was against him now. Some employees murmured indignantly, others were already talking about calling the police. The scandal was underway. And Daniel, faced with the woman who was once his, realized that the betrayal was not just about the body, but about everything they had built together. And now, all that was over. Clara was crying, Leonardo was cornered, and Daniel. He only felt a dark relief as he realized that despite the pain, at least he now knew the whole truth. The party hall seemed to have turned into a silent courtroom. The scandal had exploded before everyone's eyes, and now no one knew how to react. The air filled with murmurs was almost suffocating. Clara was motionless, her eyes red and full of tears, as if she wanted to disappear from there. Leonardo maintained a rigid expression, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed his despair. He wasn't just being exposed for an extramarital affair, but for something much worse. His empire of power and control was about to crumble. Daniel felt the impact of everything as if he had been punched in the stomach. His vision seemed blurred, his thoughts jumbled. He wanted to feel anger, hatred, indignation. But most of all, what dominated his chest was the crushing feeling of betrayal. It wasn't just Clara who had destroyed him, but also Leonardo, a man he admired and respected. With every second that passed, the weight of the truth became more unbearable. Leonardo realized he needed to act, regain control of the situation. He took a deep breath and took a step forward, adopting that calm, calculated tone of voice he always used to manipulate others. Let's all take a breather. I understand this sounds worse than it really is. But these accusations are serious and need to be considered calmly. Daniel laughed, but his laugh was bitter, filled with a contempt he had never felt before. Analyzed calmly. Do you really think you can get out of this with just nice words? Fernanda brought evidence. Documents. This is no longer about suspicion. It's about facts. Clara held Daniel's arms, her touch tentative, as if she were trying to anchor him to reality before he exploded once and for all. Please listen to me. I never wanted it to come to this. I made a wrong choice, yes. I was wrong. But I love you, I always have. He jerked her arm away, as if the touch burned him. Don't say that word. Love? What do you know about love, Clara? Love can't be bought. Love can't be sold. She broke down in tears, covering her face with her hands, while the guests' gazes were now pure judgment. What was once admiration for the woman who had always been seen as a perfect wife, now turned into contempt. Leonardo knew that if he remained silent, he would be allowing Daniel to take control of the situation. And that was something he would never allow. With his voice firm, he raised his hands as if he were mediating a conflict. No one here is a saint, Daniel. Everyone makes mistakes. I made mine, Clara made hers. But you did too. Do you think this marriage was perfect? Did you never stop to think about why Clara looked for something else? You cared more about work than your own wife. She felt invisible. Forgotten. Daniel felt anger explode inside him. So now you want to justify what you did? Like it was my fault. Like Clara had no option but to sell her dignity to you. Leonardo narrowed his eyes, a crooked smile on his face. You can hate me all you want, Daniel, but the truth is, deep down, you know you were never enough for her. Clara looked up, desperate. Don't say that, Leonardo. Daniel felt as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. Not because he believed Leonardo's words, but because, deep down, he knew that Clara would not contradict him. And that was the answer he needed. Fernanda, who until then had observed everything in silence, finally decided to intervene. You can continue this game of accusations and pathetic justifications, but the truth is one, justice will take care of you, Leonardo. And as for you, Clara, I hope that one day you understand the price of your choices. The murmurs among the guests increased. Some people were already taking out their cell phones, sending messages, sharing the scandal in real time. The news would not be confined to that room. Soon, the entire company, perhaps even the media, would know about Leonardo's corruption and involvement in fraudulent schemes. He was no longer a powerful man. He was a condemned man. Leonardo, realizing that the situation was out of control, decided it was time to go. He turned to Clara and extended his hand. Come with me. We can still get out of this together. She blinked a few times, not believing what she was hearing. What? You heard me. Come with me. I can still protect you. His voice was firm, but there was urgency in his words. He knew that if he went alone, he would face everything without anyone by his side. He needed Clara, if only to maintain the illusion that he still had something under control. Clara's eyes met Daniel's for a moment, but what she saw in them was something she had never seen before. Empty. He had already stopped fighting for her. There was no more pleading, no more pain. Just the end. She hesitated. He looked around and saw that there was no longer any refuge there. There was no more respect. There was no more house. And then, he took a step forward. He took Leonardo's hand. Daniel showed no surprise. He just nodded slightly, as if he already knew that would be the outcome. That's it, then. Clara swallowed her tears, but was unable to respond. She and Leonardo walked together to the exit of the room, ignoring the looks that followed them. But before they could walk through the door, a sound cut through the air. Sirens. The police had arrived. Leonardo stopped suddenly, his eyes widening. He looked at Fernanda, who smiled sideways. Do you think I would let you get away so easily? Two police officers entered the room, walking directly towards Leonardo. Mr. Leonardo, you are under arrest for fraud, money laundering and corruption. We have a warrant to take you right now. Chaos ensued once and for all. Clara let go of Leonardo's hand as if he were on fire. He tried to react, tried to argue, but it was too late. The police handcuffed him right there, in front of everyone, while he screamed that it was a mistake. But no one believed his words anymore. Daniel watched everything with a mix of relief and tiredness. He had lost a lot that night. But somehow I felt like I was finally free. Clara looked at him one last time, as if she wanted to say something. But Daniel just looked away. For him, she no longer existed. And then, without looking back, he left the party. The world outside was still spinning, but inside, everything was starting again. The cold night air enveloped Daniel as he left the hall, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor of the building's entrance. The city remained alive all around, indifferent to the chaos that had just occurred. The party that was supposed to be a celebratory corporate event had turned into a stage for revelations that destroyed everything he knew. He stopped for a moment, drew air into his lungs, and felt the pressure in his chest intensify. Nothing there seemed real. As if he was waking up from a nightmare that hadn't yet ended. The police car's sirens were still echoing in the street, and he knew that Leonardo was being taken away. There was no fight. No final speech. Just a defeated man being dragged to face the consequences of his own ego. But it wasn't him that Daniel was thinking about now. His lost gaze met the image of Clara, still standing at the door of the room, as if she didn't know where to go. Her eyes were full of tears, but he could no longer feel anything seeing her like that. There was a time when the sight of her pain would have been unbearable. But now, there was just a deep tiredness. An exhaustion that took root in every part of him. He looked away and started walking. The ride to your car was silent, with just the muffled sound of traffic in the background. When he got in, he let out a long sigh and rested his head on the steering wheel for a few seconds. His mind was spinning in 1,000 directions. He wondered how it all got there. When exactly had he lost control of his own life? Your home, your wife, your work. Everything seemed so far away now. He could call someone, share the pain, but he realized there was no one. He was always a reserved man, someone who avoided exposing his problems. Now he was completely alone. Slowly, he started the car and began driving, without a defined destination. The city lights flickered around him, but he saw nothing but the emptiness that had settled inside him. He passed through familiar streets, through places that once had meaning but now seemed like irrelevant points along the way. At some point, he realized that his hands were shaking on the steering wheel. A reflection of the whirlwind of emotions battling within him. Anger. Sadness. Frustration. The vibrating phone on the seat next to him brought him out of his trance. He picked up the device and saw Clara's name on the screen. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. But, without understanding why, he answered. Her voice was low, fragile. Daniel, please, can we talk? He kept his gaze fixed on the road, his jaw clenched. There is nothing more to be said, Clara. She sobbed on the other side. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I need you to listen to me. Silence prolonged. He could shut down, end everything there. But part of him wanted to hear. Maybe out of curiosity. Maybe because, deep down, there was still a shadow of the man who once loved her. Clara took a deep breath before continuing. I didn't want it to be like this. This wasn't supposed to happen. I lost myself, I let myself be carried away, and now I've lost everything. I've lost you. Daniel laughed, but his voice was hollow. Now do you realize that? I never stopped loving you. But at some point, I stopped recognizing myself. And the next thing I knew, I was already involved in something I couldn't control. He felt a weight on his chest, but he didn't allow it to weaken him. And still, you chose to stay by his side until the last second. You took his hand, you trusted him. She swallowed hard. I didn't know what to do. But when I saw him being taken away, when I realized what he really was, I felt dirty. I felt like I had been part of something horrible, something that should never have happened. He pressed his fingers against the steering wheel. But it happened. Clara cried on the other side. If I could go back in time, I would do everything differently. I would give anything to have you back. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. I wanted to feel something when I heard that. But there was nothing left but tiredness. But you can't turn back time, Clara. Neither can I. We can only move forward. She sobbed harder. So tell me how to go on without you. How do I do that? He was silent for a long time before finally responding. You find a way. Just like I'm going to have to. And then, he hung up. The road in front of him seemed endless. But for the first time that night, he felt like he didn't need to look back anymore. By the next morning, the news had spread. Leonardo and Clara's scandal was everywhere. Social networks, internal company newspapers, employee groups. The story had become public, and there was no turning back. Clara disappeared from Daniel's life. No new contacts, no messages. Just the absolute silence that now filled the space where once there was a shared life. The following days were a mix of adapting and rebuilding. Daniel did not return to the company. He asked for leave, let the lawyers deal with the divorce and allowed himself to breathe. He walked away from everything that was part of that old life and began looking for something new. It was on a random afternoon, while walking around the city aimlessly, that he met someone. Isabella. A woman he had met years before, someone who had only been a distant presence in his life, but who now seemed to shine with an intensity he had never noticed. The meeting was casual, a simple conversation, but full of meanings. She asked how he was, and for once, he didn't have to pretend. He told the truth. She listened. No judgment, no rush. Just listened. And at that moment, Daniel realized that maybe life still had something in store for him. Something that he still couldn't fully understand, but that was beginning to reveal itself. It wasn't about forgetting Clara. It wasn't about erasing the past. But about finally allowing yourself to move on. And this time, without looking back. Daniel woke up to the faint light of dawn filtering through the curtains. The house was silent, different from how it used to be. Before, Clara would be preparing coffee, walking around the kitchen barefoot, quietly humming some melody. Now there was only emptiness. He stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the last few days in every muscle in his body. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbed his face with his hands and took a deep breath. What would happen now? What came after the destruction? He walked to the kitchen, opened the cupboards, took out a cup and filled it with coffee. The strong aroma filled the air, but the taste was nothing special. Maybe because there was nothing else. He took a sip and looked out the window. The city was already moving outside, indifferent to the internal chaos he carried. The vibrating phone on the table broke the silence. He picked it up, but hesitated before looking. Maybe it was Clara again. But it wasn't. It was an unknown number. He responded without much concern. Hello. The voice on the other end was feminine, soft but full of tension. Daniel? This is Fernanda. He straightened in his chair, surprised. Fernanda? What there was? She sighed before continuing. I need to talk to you. About Leonardo. And about Clara. His stomach tightened when he heard the names. I thought there was nothing more to be said. Everything had already been exposed, all the masks had already fallen. But the way Fernanda spoke, something was yet to be revealed. Meet me at the cafe around the corner from your house in half an hour. I promise it's important. He hesitated, but eventually agreed. What else could happen? He took his car keys, put on a coat and left. When he arrived at the cafe, he found Fernanda sitting at a table in the corner, absently picking at the spoon for the coffee she had ordered. He sat across from her, watching her face. She looked tired, like she was also carrying the weight of something big. Thank you for coming, she said, bluntly. He just nodded. What do you want to tell me? She took a deep breath before starting. Leonardo is trying to get out of this. Even after everything. He has contacts, influential people who are working to mitigate the accusations against him. But that's not all. Daniel crossed his arms, waiting. He's trying to shift some of the blame onto Clara. Her name still caused an involuntary reaction in Daniel. He lay still for a moment, trying to process. Like this? He is claiming that Clara knew everything all along, that she was part of the scheme. That she helped launder money and that, in some way, she was profiting from it. His idea is to turn her into the perfect accomplice so that his sentence can be reduced. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, feeling a knot in his chest. Part of him wanted not to care. But I couldn't. As much as she had betrayed his trust, he knew that Clara was not a criminal. I knew that she may have been naive, weak, but she would never be cold enough to actively participate in a scheme of that level. Do you believe him? Fernanda shook her head immediately. No. I know Clara well enough to know that she was manipulated. But his lawyers are good, and he has influence. If no one does anything, she could end up paying for crimes she didn't commit. Daniel was silent. The dilemma was before him, clear as ever. He could simply watch from afar, allow Clara to face the consequences alone, to feel the weight of the choices she made firsthand. Or he could intervene, even after everything. Fernanda watched him carefully. I know you have no reason to help. But you're not like him, Daniel. You are not a man who watches someone get destroyed and simply turns away. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. What do you expect me to do? She placed a flash drive on the table. Inside there is information about the real people involved. The people who were really with Leonardo from the beginning. If this evidence reaches the authorities, Clara can be removed from this story. He picked up the flash drive, twirling it between his fingers. And why don't you deliver it yourself? She smiled sideways. Because coming from me, his defense will find a way to discredit everything. But if it comes from you, things change. You were betrayed, you were deceived. You became the victim in this story. If this information reaches you, no one can ignore it. Daniel felt the weight of the small object in his hand. He never imagined that, after everything, he would be faced with a decision like this. Think about it, Fernanda said, standing up. But think quickly. Because Leonardo won't wait. He stayed there for a few moments after she left, looking at his cell phone screen, at the busy street outside. If he did this, he would help Clara escape an unjust conviction. But at the same time, I knew there was no going back to what they once were. The love they had died, drowned in lies, betrayal and shame. At the end of the day, Daniel made his decision. He drove to a trusted lawyer's office and handed over the evidence, making sure it ended up in the right hands. He did this not for Clara, but because he knew the right thing needed to be done. He was not Leonardo. And it never would be. 2 weeks later, he received a message from an unknown number. Just 2 words, "Thank you, Daniel." He looked at his phone for a long time before finally deleting the message. The past was now just that. Past. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally ready to move on. Time passed like a whirlwind, taking with it the wreckage of what was once the life of each of them. Daniel watched everything from afar, with no desire to interfere again. He didn't look for Clara anymore, he didn't try to understand what happened to Leonardo after the trial, he didn't even bother to follow the outcome of the scandal at the company. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew that it all belonged to a past that he didn't want to carry. Now there was just an inevitable need to move forward, to build something new, to leave everything behind. But destiny, as much as it seemed to want to end the cycle, still had its own ways of making each person pay the price for their choices. Leonardo was condemned. The evidence delivered by Daniel and Fernanda was definitive, and the trial happened faster than anyone expected. His empire of influence collapsed before everyone's eyes. He tried, until the last moment, to avoid blame, blaming associates, employees, even Clara. But no one believed his words. The man who once ruled with so much authority was reduced to nothing more than a criminal, a scammer who used his position to enrich himself at everyone's expense. The sentence was harsh. Years in prison with no chance of appeal. His name became synonymous with corruption, his reputation destroyed. But the worst of all wasn't prison. It was oblivion. The world went on without him. Clara tried to escape the ashes of her own ruin. After the scandal, he lost everything. The house, the friends, the respect. The places I used to frequent became hostile environments, full of judgmental looks. She tried to put herself back together, tried to find a way back to something that felt normal, but there was no room for her in that world anymore. His name was marked. No company wanted to associate with the woman who got involved with a criminal. He tried to ask his family for help, but even they turned their backs. Your mistake was too great, and the weight of it fell on your shoulders without mercy. One day, he met Daniel by chance. He was walking out of a cafe, looking lighter than she had ever seen him. He moved on. Not her. When their eyes met, Clara opened her mouth to say something, but he just looked away and continued on his way. It was there that she understood. There was no turning back. For her, there was nothing left but loneliness. Fernanda, on the other hand, continued her path with dignity. He became a key player in the company's restructuring after the scandal. The administrative board realized the mistake they made in allowing Leonardo to dominate everything without question, and decided to reformulate the corporate environment. They moved away from the shadows of corruption and started from scratch. She took on an important role and became a reference for ethics and competence. His courage in exposing everything brought justice to many who were affected by his former boss's crimes. In the end, Fernanda not only survived the chaos, but emerged from it stronger than ever. And then, there was Daniel. The man who was betrayed, humiliated, brought down. But he refused to be consumed by what happened. He learned that revenge was not the answer. That true reckoning didn't come with screaming or despair, but with the peace of moving forward while those who caused destruction were left behind. Your work at the company has officially ended. He didn't want to be part of that world anymore. With the money he had, he decided to open something of his own, an independent project that would allow him to start over far from the memories of everything he had been through. And it was on this path that he met Isabella again. She didn't emerge as an immediate romance, but as a silent, gentle presence. Someone who listened to him when he needed to speak, who respected his time without trying to fill the voids that still existed within him. Little by little, what started as friendship turned into something more. It wasn't like before, it wasn't intense or overwhelming. It was light. It was real. It was true. The last time he heard about Clara was through a mutual friend. They said she was trying to rebuild her life somewhere else, away from everything. But it didn't matter anymore. She was just a distant memory. A scar that, over time, stopped hurting. Now, looking ahead, Daniel knew he had won. Not because he destroyed those who hurt him, but because he chose to live without carrying the weight of what they did to him. The past stayed where it belonged. Betrayal can destroy lives. You can rip out everything that seemed solid. But it can also be the spark that ignites the need to start over. And sometimes, starting over is what really saves us. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Leave your comment, I want to know your opinion. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, sign up now to follow more impactful stories like this. Here, betrayal is not glorified, and every choice has its consequences. Until next time.